Hello everyone, I hope you have a great day. Today we are looking at some new malicious compliance stories. I hope you enjoy them. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel to grow. And now let's start with the first story, shall we? The first story is called She Was in the Wrong. This happened a couple of years ago. I worked at a fast food restaurant and we had a scanner machine to check if money is real or not. One day I touched the machine's sensor and noticed that it still scanned my hand as money. I did this with paper as well and concluded that the machine was broken. During the same shift I had the one manager that did nothing but sit on her butt all day. She would only help us with orders if we were behind by over 20 minutes. I tell her about the machine and she says she'll check it later. That was a problem. I'm supposed to scan every bill that is $10 or $20. And for 50 or 100 I have to give it to our manager to check. A few hours go by and she still hasn't checked it. And by this point I'm checking every bill that is $10 or $20 by holding it up to a light, which can be seen as rude by a customer. One customer complains to me and calls my manager over. This customer complained how I was discriminating against her. I wasn't, and I shouldn't be checking a $10 bill like she's a criminal. Instead of defending me, as the machine was broken and she hasn't checked it, she began yelling at me in front of this customer. I told her that the machine was broken and I needed to check each bill the same I would if the machine was working. She then, without even checking the machine, said to just use the machine and said, who would even use a counterfeit on a $10 or $20 bill? I decided the argument wasn't worth the $9 an hour I was making and just complied. I quickly scanned every bill until I saw two shady acting women. The first woman handed me a $20 bill that was obviously fake. I didn't even have to check it. It felt and looked like paper. I decided I would just follow orders and scan it. Since it went off, I put it in the register. The second customer came and handed me a similar counterfeit bill. I did the same thing. Later, when my shift was about to end, my manager counted my drawer and found the two counterfeit bills. She freaked out at me. I zoned out for most of it, but most of it consisted of her calling me dumb for not noticing this obvious counterfeit and how I am going to get fired. Well, what actually happened was the regional and general managers called me over to fire me before I told them the story. They then checked the cameras and listened to our conversation about the machine being broken. They concluded that the manager was in the wrong for not letting me check the bills and telling me to use the machine that I explained was broken. She was then fired and I saw her working the cash register at a grocery store. Hopefully she checks if she gets any counterfeit bills. The next story is called The Last Break. Years ago I was the manager of a small grocery store and I hated it. Bonuses were removed, hours were long, terms of employment were harsh. I took the job to fill a gap in employment and got stuck there for almost a year until I found something else. All that being said, I put solid effort and time into it to get it right, despite it being the worst job of my life. I eventually put in my 2 weeks notice. I was the last of the batch of managers still employed that were in my group. Most got fired for not meeting unrealistic expectations and others just quit because it was so bad. On the last day of my 2 weeks, the district manager was coming by to collect my keys. He was a major part of why the job was so miserable. He was the one that gave us the hours that we could schedule. But since his bonus depended on how well we came in under hours, he shaved off time and made the salaried management work harder. I found out later that he was shaving off one full-time employee from most stores every week. He would always berate us for not working hard enough, even if we were working 80 hours a week. All the while he was working from home, and we could hear his kid in the background of our conference calls. Anyway, last day of work for me. He was supposed to show up in the morning, but he didn't. It's getting later and I need to eat. I get a call by the assistant manager that the DM came in while I was at lunch. I said to him that I will return after my lunch. And then I get the DM's call. At 55 minutes into my break, he called to let me know that if I didn't return when my break was completed, he would terminate me for job abandonment. And this is the point where the malicious compliance starts. Company policy stated that even salaried employees were entitled to 60 minutes of uninterrupted break. If there was an interruption, the 60-minute break was to start over. I informed him of this and told him his call was official business and I would be resetting my break and would return in an hour. I spent the next hour shopping for something at the store next to my own and then went over when the hour was up. I walked into the store, and as he started to talk, I told him that according to company policy, I was entitled to a 15-minute break between the end of my lunch and the end of my shift. I promptly turned my back on him and went outside to take my 15-minute break, 15 minutes before the end of my shift. When the break was over, I walked in, gave the key to the assistant manager and walked out. The DM started to follow me out and started trying to ask me questions about the store. I told him, as a former employee of this company, I felt very harassed by my former boss attempting to follow me to my car, and I would get the police involved if he did not leave me alone immediately. About 2 weeks later, I stopped by the store to see how the employees were and pick up the one thing I had forgotten to take with me. It turns out that the DM had been in the store for the last 2 weeks every day as the acting store manager, since there was no one left as a manager in any of his stores. He apparently had no idea how the stores actually worked. He had wanted me to come back from lunch so I could show him how to do my job. I'm glad he showed up so late, because had he been on time, I would have been obliged to show him. The day before my post-employment visit, he had gotten a surprise visit at my old store by his boss. She fired him on the spot. He had a company car he was allowed to clean out, but then he had to turn over the keys. So there he was, an hour away from home, jobless, carless and clueless. And I don't quite feel bad for not feeling bad about that. About a month later, about 2 months after I quit, I got a letter in the mail. Inside was a certificate of appreciation, thanking me for my year of service and looking forward to the years to come, from a place I had quit months ago with less than a year of employment. Turns out the DM had me out on unpaid leave instead of accepting my 2 weeks because he was going to get fired if he lost another manager. The last story is called I Will Make You Want to Hire Me. To understand the setting, you need to know what a cross-docker is. That's a logistics company that ships LTL loads, less than truckload. So let's say that you have a customer that has 2 skids for city A, 3 skids for city B and a skid for another city. You go to the customer, pick up all of his shipments, then put them in with the other orders for their respective cities. The freight moves across the dock into its destination container. With this arrangement, you spend the day running around picking up orders. Late in the afternoon, the load starts to arrive at the warehouse and the fun begins. The dock crew work from 4 PM to midnight, sometimes later, depending on volume. Let's call my friend Charlie. He was a temp in the dispatch office. When he was hired, it was staffed by old manager, manager's nephew and a day dispatcher who set up the pickups. That was the day shift. Charlie was the afternoon shift, along with 2 data entry clerks. So the dock would load a container destined for a particular city. They hand the folder with the labels for each of the shipments in the container to data entry, who get it into the server and generate a manifest. Most of these containers were intermodal, and they were shipped out by train. You have seen ships with containers piled on them? Same thing, except for domestic shipments they would use 53-foot containers rather than the 40-foot containers you see on boats. Charlie would take the folder. Then he would verify that everything in the container was headed for the correct city. Then check for temperature-controlled freight, check for dangerous goods and make certain the container was placarded correctly. Then he would go online and check the container into the railway system. When Charlie was hired, they were doing about 5 to 10 rail shipments a shift. He was told to copy and paste the information from the railway's webpage into a report, and then send a heads-up email at the conclusion of the shift to each of the partner terminals in the respective destination cities. By the time he had been there 2.5 years, that volume had increased to about 40 to 50 loads a shift. The day shift might handle 3 or 4, and the manager and nephew would use the copy and paste routine. But Charlie didn't have the time to do that. Charlie's brother was a bit of a techie. Charlie noticed that he could export a report from the rail yard side. So he got his brother to write a script that would harvest the relevant info and generate reports for each of the cities, and would do it in a few seconds. Charlie approached the manager and asked for a position with the company, as it would be a raise and he would get health benefits. The manager dragged his feet and finally said no. Charlie thought about for a bit, then told the manager, "I'm going to be taking 2 weeks off, starting Monday. Call the agency and get them to send someone else over." The manager was furious, but he didn't have a leg to stand on. He wasn't Charlie's employer, so he had no authority to deny Charlie the time off. Charlie was in a good standing with the agency, one of their stars. Temp workers aren't the most reliable, so anyone who kept his head down and caused no issues was valued, and the agency backed him up. Charlie had friends on the dock, and they kept him informed. The first problem was that the replacement the agency sent had nothing in the way of experience, so the manager had to train him from the ground up. This resulted in many phone calls throughout the evening to the manager, which got him more and more cranky as the days went on. The second was the reports. This company was on the west coast and was shipping across the country. Each destination location had a huddle scheduled at 7 AM in their respective time zones, where they would review the incoming shipments. The dock would shut down sometimes at 1 AM, and the new temp needed to get the reports out by 3 or 4 AM. And the copy and paste routine was taking way too long. Which brings us to the third problem: overtime. The temp was running 12 to 14-hour shifts. The manager delegated the nephew to work afternoons to help out. That meant the manager had to cover the nephew's workload as well as his own. The nephew was really not happy either, as he was a sports fanatic and played hockey several times a week. He had to miss his games. Even with the nephew on the job, the reports took forever to get out, and there were mistakes made. The temp-controlled freight was sent dry. And in one case, they had to send the dock foreman racing to the rail yard to placard a container before the yard would accept it. After a week or so, Charlie took the opportunity to distribute his resume and put the manager up as reference. So now the manager was getting calls about Charlie and realized that Charlie might not come back. He was taking flamethrower heat from all directions, and his only way out was to put Charlie on the payroll. By this time, the agency had sent 2 temps to cover what Charlie used to do, with the oversight of nephew. The manager called Charlie in for an interview. "Okay, Charlie, we will put you on the payroll. We will pay you the same as the agency paid you, and we will give you benefits." "No, thanks, I have other interested companies that are offering more." "Fine, we'll put you on salary and bump it up by 10%. "Again, no thanks, I won't accept a salaried position unless I get to go home after 40 hours. If you need me to stay late, you need to pay me overtime." "How much an hour are you looking for?" "Well, I know what you pay the agency for my services. And right now you have 2 temps working to cover the shift. Tell you what, pay me what you were paying the agency and add the benefits, and you have a deal." "What?" "That's almost double what you were making before. And that's what other companies are offering. You can cut what you are paying out to the agency by half, and there won't be as many screw-ups. Your nephew can strap on his skates, and you can watch TV all evening without getting phone calls. Or things can continue the way they are going. What's it gonna be?" Charlie got hired on, made a good chunk more money, and as a sweetener, negotiated 3 weeks of holidays a year. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.